Lead a healthier life. This is CURES Cures.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the CURES Cure Show, where we love to explore the cutting edge of wellness. I'm Kara Sunderland, and we can't really be totally well without handling our money well. So we're talking about clearing debt and really our blocks to abundance with financial advisor and Chopra trained, as in Deepak Chopra, mindfulness expert Sylvia Guinan. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Kara. Thanks so much for having me.
And also the author, The Richness of Divorce in 7 Steps. And this is all related also to our chakras, because money actually is energy.
It is. And I think so many times we forget about that, right? So we want to have good energy around it.
Yeah. I was just reading, for those who delve into the spiritual, I'm sure you all know Louise Hay, but I was literally, as I was coming out here to do this, the affirmation that popped up on Facebook from Louise Hay was, "I love money and it easily fills my pockets." You know, this is the affirmation she puts out, which I think to a lot of people that sounds good, but that's not what happens. And there's a lot of feeling of lack really around money. What does that mean from a spiritual perspective? Like, how do we get at it beyond the budget?
Yeah, no, I think that we all have traumas around money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's what we observed when we were little, how our parents managed money, where we saw lack of money. We might have gotten some fear around money. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really interesting, and I think the way to think about it is that we're not our thoughts. We're the thinker of our thoughts, right? So redirecting the messages that we have around money is key. So I think if you grew up in an environment where it was always lacking, right? I think you bring that in, and there's that fear that comes up. So how do you reprogram that, right? That lacking.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So right now, I think the news is showing that the economy isn't sure exactly where we want it to be. I mean, there's the news that came out, didn't grow exactly where we wanted it to be. But more than that, the credit card debt is way up. And so this is a problem because people don't always talk about their debt, right? We see all the beautiful things that people buy, but we assume that they're all wealthy, but that's not really always the case. Sometimes people are just going into debt, and it could be a lack of education, or it could be something that this is just how you tend to manifest around money. Like even though you make tons of it, you still have lack because you keep creating more debt or you're sabotaging yourself in a way. Do you see that with your clients?
Yeah, I don't see it a lot with my clients, but I do see it when I'm doing workshops or I'm speaking to people. I think that what I've learned and what I've seen now from managing money for the last 24 years is the way around that is really having like a plan, right? I think that if you have a plan, right, because I think number 2 is going into budget, right? But the budget's not going to work unless you have a plan. So you start with a plan. And it's not just so much about only the debt and paying off the debt, but it's also in that plan, having that vision. What do you want with money? What do you want your lifestyle to look like, right? Because then that's going to motivate you, right, to deal with the debt. And then, step number 2 is, again, I find it fascinating because, there's people that don't even make a whole lot of money, and I get amazed with how much abundance they actually have. And it's incredible. So I think sometimes it's not, yes, it's really nice to earn a lot of it, but if you're not, like you said, keeping it and you're spending it, you're going to be at a deficit. You're going to be in a lack of abundance. Yeah. So it's about living also, right? And having fun, but living and being within your means.
Okay, so how do we think about this in a spiritual way, or how do we reprogram our energy around money if you grew up like many of us did with fear or lack in the home around money?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is subconscious. A lot of times I'll even go to sleep. They have a lot of these abundance, right, sleep mantras that you can sleep to, and it keeps just reprogramming that money flows to me. I had read something a while ago. Tony Robbins said that he used to always, when he came up from almost nothing, right? Like he lived in his car for a while, but he would talk about how he would always say, abundance flows to me daily, or abundance pours over me monetarily. Like, he's asking. So it's also asking and being open to it, right? And not being afraid is, I think, really key, right? Not being afraid of it. I think sometimes we're so afraid of our situation. I think that one saying, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but sometimes light is the darkness most feared. Right? So sometimes we fear the light, the facing the budget. So I think it's, again, like kind of facing that budget, like doing the budget, and also changing our mindset around it, right? Because how many times do we write our bills or go online and pay our bills, and we're like, oh, I have to pay this, or oh, and it's like so stressful, right? And you're feeling like it's flying out. But what if you change the mindset to, I get to pay this?
Right, and a lot of people who work with affirmation, so I think that's your first point, is interesting because you wrote your book around the 7 chakras and the idea that money is energy, and this is about divorce, but so much of this, there's a lot been written about that are these old wisdom traditions, you know, so I guess money is related to how we feel about security and also self-worth.
Right.
So, when you're dealing with people, of course you have the practical stuff of, there's all kinds of softwares now, we probably do need to write down what we're spending our money on and all that, but if you find that you're just afraid of it, or you're dreading it, or you keep repeating the same mistakes no matter what, you get that raise, you get the this, you think it's looking up, and then, oh, it happened again or something, then that might mean we need to do some reprogramming. So step 1 would be perhaps creating an affirmation that you're going to put around money that says, you know, I love it, it flows easily, something that's going to feel good for you to say.
Exactly. Step number 1 is change the affirmation, right? So it's, you know, money flows easily and steadily for me on a daily basis from known and unknown sources. Something like that, something that's just very open.
I like that one. Money flows easily from known and unknown sources, because a lot of us assume that the only place we're getting money is from our job. And for a lot of Americans, it could mean that they're a paycheck away from disaster if they lose their job.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it is exactly that, right? And so again, I think just constantly saying, and it's funny, I was having this conversation with a friend of mine from California, and I was saying, oh gosh, I have, you know, my last tuition bill for the year, and it's a big one, and I'm like, you know, balancing, and she's like, just envision yourself, you know, just paying it and hitting send, like just envision it happening. And it's so true, right? And I know this, right, because I do this for a living, but you know, even with myself, like you can get yourself like overwhelmed, you know, because we have to, you know, we have all these obligations to pay for. We want to save for our retirement, we want all these things. So again, I think it's saying that affirmation. I think it's visualizing it, right? Visualize yourself paying off those bills that you wanted to pay off, just visualizing them being done, feeling how it feels to not have that debt looming over you anymore, feel that sense of freedom, right?
Do you care to share, I won't put you too much on the spot, but you've gone on to be a financial advisor, you have your MBA, you have your series, lots of different, there's lots of numbers with series, all the series.
Yes.
Okay, I know you've really helped women who have found themselves in precarious situations after divorce, rebuilding, feeling worthy. Maybe they had given all the responsibility to finances to the man. Sometimes that can happen.
Yes.
So you're certified in helping women after divorce and really helping them financially. So is there something that, through that, the question I was going to ask you at first is, you have all this knowledge, but do you care to share what was your relationship around money growing up, and did getting all this knowledge help?
You know, that's a great question. So my relationship around money was about shame of spending it. Shame,
okay.
Yeah. So I remember, like, you know, growing up, and if I would come home with like a shopping bag, my mother would say like, oh my God, you went shopping again? I can't believe you went again. And having this like fear or losing the pleasure of going shopping because feeling like guilty, feeling like, oh, I just bought myself something and I shouldn't have.
Yeah,
right?
I can identify that. Like the kids, like, you know, I have to, but then if you just go by yourself, I don't know, it doesn't feel the same as when I went to a teenager and got excited to spend someone else's money, maybe.
I agree.
Yeah.
So for mine, it was always, you know, that, and I work through this a lot with clients too, right? It's about, you know, it's also not fun having the money if you can't enjoy it or you feel badly about spending it, because that's almost as bad as having the debt, right?
Okay,
it's really not good.
So is credit card debt, would you say, from a spiritual perspective? I know sometimes we get in a little bit of this, but when we talk about there's good debt and there's bad debt in the world of finance, do you also see it that way, that when people are overspending for whatever reason, to buy nice things or because their tuition was too much for the kids or whatever, but we always hear credit card debt is bad debt. Do you see that differently, that kind of debt versus a mortgage on a spiritual level of like what we're doing when we're creating that way?
Yeah, you know, I see that's really interesting, because I think, you know, when we have a mortgage debt or a car payment debt, we're doing something. We're building something with that debt.
We're building value. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
We're actually, in a way, increasing our net worth, right? Because as we're paying off that debt, it's going from one side of the balance sheet to the other.
Okay, right. So that's why we call a mortgage good debt, because feels maybe difficult to pay that every month for some people, but it's actually helping you and it's productive.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, on the other hand, again, and you brought up education, which, I think we can go many ways with that, right? Because some of us, I tell my kids, like, your education is part of your legacy. That's a gift. That's the gift that keeps on giving, right?
Yes, yes. Okay, so that's a good way to keep all of us who are terrified right now of these. Vanderbilt just announced it's going to be $100,000 a year. Some of the New England colleges are saying $90,000 a year. So people are going, is this even worth it to get a college education? This is a personal decision, but you are saying that we should look at when we're paying for education or for our kids, we're giving them the gift that no one can take from them.
That's exactly right. And what I say to my kids is, we could leave you houses, cars, money, but all of that could be taken away. But really, no one can take away really what you've learned, right? So that's your intellectual property. That's yours.
Okay, that's a great way of thinking about it. Makes you feel a little bit better writing the tuition checks.
It does, yes.
Maybe.
So it's all about mindset and what we tell ourselves.
No, there's also, there's a talk in the spiritual world about pray before you pay. Can you talk about some advice for people who are really nervous? I just did this the other day. I was teaching a workshop on plugging our energy drains, and I said, everyone raise your hand about something that stresses you out that you wish you'd never have to do again. I always get the grocery shopping. I'm one of those people, I don't like grocery shopping. And someone else said paying my bills. You always get that. And so just the fact of sitting down to pay the bills, how do we open to more abundance, regardless of what your paycheck is?
Yeah, for me, it's again, I changed my mindset. Rather than, oh, I've got to pay this bill again, and that feeling of anxiety, I say, I get to pay the bill. I get to. I have the I can do it. I can pay the bill. So it's changing the way you think that you can. It's not a chore. It's just something that you have. And I think too is opening up to the pure possibility, right? Like, you're paying the bills because you can pay the bills, right? But they're not always going to be there. So the fact that if you have a plan or you have a budget, there's certain bills that are always going to be around, your, mortgage, utilities and all that. But if it's a credit card debt, like, that will, if you do your job, that will go away. And there's a lot of beauty in knowing that, you are chiseling away at it, but it will go away.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What do you do if it's a little bit more dire? Like, you're looking at it and going, I don't even know where to cut, but I'm getting myself further into debt. I have, I'm not balanced financially. And so maybe you're not like, I get to pay this bill. You're like, where is the money coming from?
Yeah.
How do we start from that spiritually and psychologically as we change our relationship with money?
Yeah, I think, again, is like surrendering, because that fear can be paralyzing,
yes.
right? That
People just not look at it and it gets worse.
Yeah, there was a study done by the American Psychological Association that said the number one thing, I think they interviewed 4,000 people that keeps people up at night is, their bills. It's their expenses and their finances, right? So I think that the best thing to do, right, is because it's going to affect your health. So if you don't have it and it's stressful, this is where I think going with the flow and releasing is letting go. And you have to say, what's the worst that can happen? What's the worst that can happen if I'm late? Right?
Okay.
It stinks. It's not ideal, right? But your other alternative, right, is to sit and suffer and torture yourself over it, and you don't have it.
So prioritizing and making the plan. And then some people talk about, I don't know if you do this, that they'll have a little altar, or they have a little special spot where they pay bills to sort of change their relationship of it. That don't just throw them all in a pile and lose them and not want to talk, that angst around it. From the perspective of changing our energy, is the way we even do it? Should we be setting up a day and getting our mindset in order before we sit down to do it?
Yeah, and again, I think it's, again, saying your money pours all over me, or money flows to me easily and steadily on a daily basis, saying your thing. I sometimes keep a crystal jar, so I have crystal stones.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll have a stone for every bill that I have to pay. And as I'm paying them, I put it into another jar. And it feels really good to see it move from one to the other.
Okay.
And it reminds me of everything that's left to pay, and then how I do it and when I do it, and it feels good to move it.
To move it, right? Okay. And I do remember years ago we did something about organization with you. You like your little pens, and there's a color, right, for each kid, and for stuff for Sylvia versus stuff for work, and you look at that visually, and it's really imbalanced. I use the color red for when I have to go do a public appearance at an event, because it reminds me I have to leave the building or be there on time. But if I saw too much red and no perhaps aqua, which would be Cara time, then we're imbalanced. So just putting that, even thinking about money and time in the same way of where is our energy imbalanced?
You know, that's excellent. I cannot believe you still remember that interview.
Oh, I do remember, yes.
You're amazing.
but people often say that when it comes to energy, we relate, often you relate to money and time the same way. So if we're always running late, or we never give ourselves enough time, we might also feel very compacted, like we're not that person with, I can pay the bill this week or next week, I've got tons of extra money. Like creating that space is something that happens a lot of times in both of those areas of money and time.
Yes. And when I say though, like, you know, I get to pay the bill, it doesn't mean that money is always flowing, right? And you're happy about paying it, but it's about changing your mentality. And I think that more comes in. And I think it's also gratitude, right? Being, you know, grateful. Like I try to be grateful for paying the bill.
Right.
Even though I can think of other things I'd want to be spending my money on, but just grateful. Like every time I pay something, I'm like, oh, thank you. Like, you know, that's one other thing. And I would say, you know, the other thing, again, on the calendar, if you know you have some bigger ones coming up that month that are a little bit stressful, but you really want to be mindful of how you're spending your money and what you're doing, sometimes I will put like Amex on my calendar, just to remind myself that it's coming. So it also reminds me, do not put more on the Amex because it's coming.
Okay. And so the goal, obviously, from a practical perspective, would be to have no credit card debt, because from an investment perspective, we're never getting ahead when we have credit card debt. Is that true?
No, it's true, because you know you're paying off. Hopefully, you're paying off a lot more than the minimum, but you know you're getting charged interest on it, and then you know you're getting tempted to use it again, right? So when you talked about debt that you feel bad about, I think it's learning to be disciplined, right? So there's certain things we have to spend on, but you know I think it's really asking yourself, you know, and it's hard, right? But do I really need that extra? Can we maybe not go out to dinner that fourth time, or should we not? Or wouldn't it be better to maybe do one less dinner a week or a month, whatever you do, but save more, put that bucket towards a really nice trip?
So part of that is having the goal. When you sit with your clients, you ask them what kind of lifestyle, because then we come from a place of abundance versus deprivation. If we have a plan that we know, well, my goal is to someday not work as hard and have a place to live that's warm or something, then we would have that, having that vision, having that motivation, kind of like when you want to lose weight and they say put a picture of your younger self, or when you were in your favorite jeans. Having that visual or having that goal is important, so we can take the small steps to get there.
It is, yeah, it is. And I think to me that's like your sense of purpose, right? So it all makes sense, and it makes that maybe sacrificing a little bit today, right, the big reward of tomorrow. Right, so it doesn't feel as much as a sacrifice, because you have something in mind that's the long game, right, when you arrive.
So just the idea of changing this, because I think a lot of us, you know, I grew up with a single mom where she owned her own business, and it was, you know, kind of feast or famine. There'd be really good months, and then other times you're like, oh, I don't think things are very good right now, you know, and so there wasn't a lot of stability, versus there are some people who work at the same job for years and years and years, and maybe they don't have a lot, but they're never worried that it's not coming. They just wish they had more. So we all have our own money stories, and I guess that's part of it, is that of all the years you worked with people, even the wealthy people, everyone has their own story and their relationship to money. It's not like everyone else is getting it right and you're sitting there with your negativity.
Yeah, no, everybody's got their own story, and everybody has their own way of doing it. But I really think, again, the key is, right, changing, right? Because I think so many times, you know, when we say, oh, well, you know, this has been a tough month, but I'm going to do it next month, and then you put it off. Or even, you know, starting to have like a little bit of a rainy day fund. So many times, you know, people will say, well, you know, right now I can't, I've got to do this. I think it's so important, even for your wellness, right? And also for your attracting more abundance, is to start a little, you know, an account for yourself, right? That's like your rainy day fund.
Okay.
So if something really happens, you know.
Even if you still have the credit card debt, would you tell people to start putting a little bit in a rainy day fund rather than wait till they have the debt all paid off?
I think so. I think so, because you know what it does for you mentally? Again, it starts to create that feeling of abundance, like I have, versus I don't have, versus that lack, right? So I think it's important to have something there that you're building for yourself.
So let me ask you, there's different ways. You could listen to people like Dave Ramsey, who would say, start with the highest interest, no, he says a snowball, like start with the smallest bill and then get big if you have a credit card. If let's say you have 3 credit cards and one's 1,000 and one's 5,000 and one's 10,000, you would start with the 1,000 because you'd be like, I gotta win. Right. And a financial advisor might say, just start with the one with the highest interest rate. But as we talk about money more from an emotional perspective, and I think for women this is really important, because maybe there have been plenty of books written about that we've been cultured different with money, told not to talk about it as much, or maybe even felt a little bit more insecurity around it than, not always, but then a lot of men, where you might have grown in a house where the man did it all. When you talk about debt from a spiritual perspective, or how you coach your clients, would you say there's the right way to tackle it to create that feeling of abundance, like the biggest interest rate or the let's get some wins?
Yeah, I get torn with that, but I do like the let's get some wins.
You do?
I do.
But psychologically, we just like feel better. So that
Right.
feeling matters. From your perspective of everything you've studied, from both just regular practical financial stuff to our spiritual traditions and how energy works, the more we can feel flow, asking yourself, how would I feel better about this? And I guess it could be different.
Right.
But asking that question, what's going to make me feel better, actually matters when we're budgeting.
I think it does, and I think it's that feeling, like you said, if there's 5 bills out there, right, that you have to pay, and all of a sudden you've knocked 2 of the tiny ones out, and you have 3. It just feels like there's less of a burden on you, right, and there's less to keep track of, and you're more likely to pay those off next. So I think it is important to do that. And again, when you talk about abundance, I think if we can remember 3 key things, right? So one is, again, what we talked about, like it's your mindset, right? So you're not your thoughts, you're the thinker of your thoughts. So how are you going to think about money? Like, and slowly starting to reprogram the way you think. So if you grew up with scarcity, if you grew up with erratic, money flows coming in, right? How do you change that story? And just start to change that story in your mind, right?
Right, so it starts with making, and we've done a lot of this on this show and others with psychologists, that when you have an affirmation, it doesn't mean that it may not feel like, well, that's not reality. But the idea is it's an intention, right? So
Right.
I am abundant. You might want to get a little bit more detailed with it, but money is flowing easily to me. And right now you might not feel like it is, but the point would be you're saying that because it's an intention, and you have experience where you've actually seen this change people when they start to do this, because there is neuroscience behind this.
Oh yeah, no, I can't tell you how many women I've seen change, and women that, have gone through divorce, right, and lifestyle significantly changes, right, so they're used to an amazing lifestyle sometimes, right, and those assets get cut in half, so spending is cut, and they've never managed money, and there's a fear around money, but I've watched them, and it's so rewarding and amazing to see, change their thoughts around money, change the way they spend, and change the way they handle it. And now I see them, and they've been able to pay off some debt. They've been able to save and acquire. They're really focused on their we spend so much time on the long game, right? What are the goals? What's your purpose? What do you really want? So it really can be done, but I think the thing is, it's starting today. We always say, well, I'm going to start next month. Next month will be better, or
we put it off.
And again,
procrastination doesn't work when it comes to money and energy.
It doesn't.
Yeah, okay.
And I think, again, light is the darkness most feared. Like facing that light of all the bills that I have, I'd say, tackle it. Put it all out on the table.
Write it all
create a
down,
spreadsheet.
just one thing, and then just a little bit at a time, and start celebrating every time you do it.
Yeah, and try to stop the spending, right? Stop the bleeding.
Stop the hemorrhaging.
Exactly.
Okay.
Just stop. And
so would people, when a lot of people are like, but I got to save for retirement, I got to do my 401k, I got to do this, I got to do that. Would you tell them to actually start reducing all those things so that they're not overspending?
Yeah, that's a little tricky.
Because there's the thought of pay yourself first, which makes you feel good, but then it doesn't make you feel good if you were unbalanced on the other end.
Right, and the pay yourself first, on the savings for retirement, if you're employed and you're getting some kind of a match.
Do at least that.
Do at least that.
Yeah.
Because you're
regardless if you have credit card debt or not, just keep doing that, because the long game is that's going to multiply.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's the practical. Just because you have debt, we don't want to focus all on that. We want to say this is something we're going to tackle over time. For instance, if you had 50 pounds to lose, you're not going to lose it all in a month. So I guess you're going to lose it a little bit at a time.
That's right.
And sticking to that discipline and the small wins applies to money just like it applies to anything else we're trying to accomplish, losing weight or whatever.
It does, and here's the reality too, right? You're not alone. So I think sometimes what could be an obstacle, and it also could be an opportunity, right? It's your partner, right? You've got to talk to your partner. They've got to be on board with the plan. you know, the kids, right? Sometimes, you know, we're used to taking the kids out to dinner and doing this and doing that, and never saying no. But sometimes if we have to pay off debt, right, it's the reality of saying.
So would you tell your kids that? Like, we need to do this X, Y, and Z? In fact, we only have a couple minutes left in this program, but that's a good place to end. If our kids are now growing up with our money values, or like it, you know, for good or for good or for bad, depending on how we're doing it, they're absorbing stuff from us. How do we talk to our children about creating abundance and clearing blocks to it?
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, we have the opportunity, though, to create a really good slate with them. So I think teaching them right, you know, especially when they get their summer jobs or they're working or they're getting gifts, you know, I always try to say, you know, have 3 different buckets, right? Like, have a bucket that you're saving for yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe that's for your long-term car or for, you know, spending in college. Have your bucket, right, that you get to enjoy a little bit of today, you know, eating with friends and whatever it is that you like to do. And then maybe have your bucket that you want, you know, maybe you want to give a little bit more. And,
right.
And that's the last thing we didn't really touch upon. But I also think that there's so much about giving. And so many times when we're feeling a lack of abundance, we want to hang on to our money. But I find that, like, and I see it with myself and with others, when you donate or you do or you give blindly, especially when it's really uncomfortable, I think it comes back to you.
Yes, of course. And I truly believe that. And of course, you know, in spiritual traditions, it's always talked about whatever we give multiplies and comes back. So it's often said I know you're trained in the Deepak Chopra mindfulness and meditation, and often those traditions will teach us that what we're grateful for or what we let go of is what multiplies and comes back to us. So even making sure that we're intentional about that third bucket, about how are we going to give. If you want more money, you actually need to give some.
Absolutely. I think that's key. And then the last part that I'll end, right, is so many times we talk to ourselves, we're so mean to ourselves, like, you're always overspending, look at what you did, or whatever that negative voice that's talking. And my check-in is, I try to think of, well, how would I talk to Kara? I would never say that to Kara. I would never speak to you that way. So being kind and loving to ourselves.
Yes, the self, right. How can we treat ourselves like our best friend? So I just want to let everyone know, this is a book that might be really useful for you if you have gone through a divorce. It's called The Richness of Divorce in 7 Steps, and to Unwind Your Marriage with Love and Grace, by Sylvia Guinan, who is a financial advisor but also trained in the spiritual aspects of life and money, which money is a big part of life. So that's why I wanted to explore it to you. You know, you got to do your spreadsheets and all that stuff you do, but you get a little deeper in this. So if you've gone through a divorce and you're feeling really awful, this is a great resource for, especially for women.
Thank you, Kara.
Sylvia, thank you so much for being with us. And for all of you, you can, if you're watching this on TV, thank you so much. You can also listen on the CURES podcast. I invite you to subscribe, leave us a review. It helps the work that we do. Have a great day, everyone, and be well.